Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment or medications if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here. Visit bewelltexas.org.
Welcome, folks, to the episode number 31 of the No Conference for Old Men podcast where three old guys are talking Houston Cougars basketball with a bit of Big 12 coverage added in as well, and proud members of the GoCoogs.com network, the undisputed number one Houston Cougars content provider. So we have a jam-packed episode where we've learned from last season and are trying to be a little bit more on point in these preview episodes. Though we're calling this our combo Big 12 and National Preview episode, we will focus our time on what our listeners want the most, which is always Houston Cougars basketball. So we'll actually start with a top-line summary of our Cougars Game 1 results over Jackson State, then provide an in-depth preview of the Houston Cougars Big Game 2 versus number 11 Auburn this coming Saturday. Then we'll get into our rapid-fire previews with some quick-hitting snippets for each team and our Big 12 projections for the season, and end with what we're calling our national top 8 plus 1 list, zeroing in on who we believe are the true contenders for a national championship run. So let's get right into it, guys. Tom, why don't you start off with your quick key points from our Jackson State 97-40 win at home to open the season?
I think the thing that jumped out to me was the ball movement on offense seemed to have a better flow than we've had the past couple of years, especially LJ and Emmanuel. It appeared that when they had a shot, open shot, they took it. It seemed like last year they were a little bit reluctant to take a shot that early in the shot clock, and we'd pass it back out and then end up having to force a shot, late in the shot clock. So I think overall that was the main thing. Took out of the game, still had that defensive intensity. Everybody got to play. It was just a shellacking. Very
nice. How about you, Bill? What were your thoughts from the game?
I mean, from a 57-point victory, there's not a whole lot to comment on. I love the fact that we were 8 of 10 from beyond the three-point line at halftime. We shot over 50% from the arc for the game. We shot over 50% from the field. We didn't miss a free throw. We just dominated them in every statistical category. I mean, it was just a dominating performance. To mention something about everyone getting to play, Chase did not play at all. And this was like an exhibition game. There's not a whole lot to take away from it. But who knows? That could be telling. But that's about it for me. It was just a blowout, and we looked good in every single area, and everyone that played looked great.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, I don't know if you were on the boards or not, but it was shared that the intent is to redshirt him, McCarty.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's been published elsewhere or not, but certainly, Ryan on GoCoogs.com had shared that with the board that's the intent unless something goes awry.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, great viewpoint, guys. And for this type of game, it's useless to go through the detailed analytics. So I'll just leave you guys with 3 that tell the story. We limited Jackson State to 32% effective field goal percentage and only 17.4% from 3, which is abysmal. We forced turnovers on 31% of their possessions. That's almost a third of their possessions. And we shot 60% from three-point range, which I'm not sure we're going to do again this whole season. And you know what? Our best player box score plus minus for the game was our very new point guard, Milos Uzan, who was a plus 28 for the game with 8 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, 4 steals, 1 block in 26 minutes of play, which was incredible. Now let's get into what fans really want to know in preparation for Saturday's big game versus Auburn. Bill, why don't you start off and give us your players' take on the huge matchup that's really so early in the season and not like what we've done before?
Yeah, we're playing the number 11 team. We're 4, they're 11, so it's a great early matchup, and that'll certainly give us a lot more insights into the team. And where we are right now. Auburn, the head coach, Bruce Pearl, the players love playing for him. They have great camaraderie. They play for each other. They certainly play for him, and he's a great coach. Not surprising there. Steve, not to steal your thunder, but they're sixth nationally last year anyway in defensive efficiency. They're a good defensive team. They give up 68.3 points, or they did last year, but a good defensive team. They were first in field goal percentage defense in the SEC, second in blocks. They scored 83 a game last year, and like I said, gave up 68.3. Their players, which we'll focus on, consist of 3 starters returning. One is JP Pegues, 6'2" point guard, 190 pounds, scored 18.5 points last year, 4 rebounds, almost 5 assists, came in as a transfer a couple years ago from Furman. They're a good shooting team. He is not one of them. He looks to score, but he's not a great shooter. They've got a 5-star freshman point guard that's coming in, Tahad Pettiford, 6'1", 175. He also is a point guard who looks to score. He probably will not be starting against us, but he'll get plenty of time, and at some point he's too talented not to keep off the floor. So they could be starting 2 point guards. The shooting guard is Miles Kelly. He transferred in this year from Georgia Tech, 6'6", 190, averaged 14 points, 5.5 boards, led Georgia Tech in scoring last year, good shooter. Denver Jones started last year, 6'4" shooting guard, 6'4", 205, 42% three-point shooter. So he's one of their very good shooters. Kelly's going to be a good shooter. Jones is a good shooter. He started his career at Alabama. He played at FAU, and it's his second year at Auburn. I mean, he's a good athlete, good player, but he is a very good outside shooter. Then they've got another swing man named Chad Baker Mazzara, 6'7", 180. He plays a lot of guard, but he also plays small forward, so he's a swing man. Another really good three-point shooter, 42% last year. He is a matchup problem at 6'7". He's long, and if he's playing guard, he's tough to defend. And then we get to their best player, John Broome, power forward center, 6'10", 240. He averaged 16.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, 2.2 blocks last year, consensus All-American. He tested the NBA waters. He was told that he was going to be a mid to late second round pick. So he decided to come back, work on his game, hopefully improve his draft stock. Yeah, he is an extremely good, talented player, and he could be a matchup problem. Although with our 3 big men, I think that any of them can match up well with him. And, if we've got to give up some fouls, whatever that might be, I think we've got the depth and the talent to at least some extent to neutralize him. Yep. But Kelly and Jones, if they get open shots, they're going to need to hit those shots in order to beat us. The 2 point guards, Pegues and Pettiford, they could tend to be shoot first players. And, if the ball movement isn't great, which typically with Auburn it is, that's going to slow them down. They were a 4th seed in the tournament last year. They played a fairly disciplined team in Yale and got knocked out of the tournament round 1. We can tend to be very disciplined offensively as well. Don't make mistakes. Uzan will certainly help to that extent because he's so good with the ball. So that plays into our strengths. Our other strengths are defending anybody that we play against, dominating the boards, move the ball offensively. These are all things we do well, and these are all keys to beating Auburn. And if we do that, we shoot reasonably well, even just an average shooting game, we beat Auburn. If we shoot well, then we win comfortably. And I see us beating them 78-70.
How about you, Tom, from a coach's perspective?
I see a contrast of styles. Auburn, they want to play high octane. They want to get up and down the floor. The problem is we're, if not the number one team in transition defense, we're up there. So my prediction is Auburn probably get frustrated because they want to get up and down, and then they get back on defense and they got to grind it out. So big contrast of styles. The strength of Auburn, like Bill alluded to, is their 3-point shooting, and then Janai Broome down low, like Roberts, he's a lefty. However, we do monster the post, so anytime he gets the ball with his back to the basket, we send the other big men there, and then we make him pass, and we'll see what kind of passer he is. If he's not a good passer, we can get turnovers out of that. If he's sometimes they're reluctant passers, and they end up forcing some shots against the double team. So should be a good matchup this time of the year. I think another thing we have in our favor is we have more continuity as far as players in the program. Auburn's trying to, mix and match some players in the program. So at this stage of the season, we might be a little more cohesive than Auburn is. Otherwise, it should be a good one.
So from an analytics perspective, I just want to remind folks that we used last season's ending KenPom stats early in the year when we preview games, until we get to late December when enough data has come through for the current season's analytics to be meaningful. So in looking at 2024's season ending numbers, to give folks a better sense of what to expect, there's very, very little separating the two teams, where UH was number 2 in KenPom and Auburn was at number 4. We were 19th in adjusted offensive efficiency, while Auburn was number 6, as Bill had mentioned, in adjusted defensive efficiency. On the flip side, as everyone knows, UH was number 2 in adjusted defensive efficiency, while Auburn was a highly efficient number 10 in adjusted offensive efficiency. On offense, Auburn's been one of the better shooting teams in the country, ending last year at number 35 in effective field goal percentage, and are especially deadly from 2-point range, where they were number 22 in KenPom with Broome at the center of it all. They also don't turn the ball over a lot, ranking number 55 in KenPom in turnover percentage. Then you match that up against our number 2 effective field goal percentage D that defends every single shot, and we're especially great at specifically defending the 2-point shot, which is their staple. We were number 2 in block shots percentage and number 3 in steals. So I think as long as Francis is well healed and back for us in this game, because Auburn is really big up front, I think we're going to be okay. On the flip side, Auburn's D is like us and has been exceptional and very similar in many fronts, where they ended last season at number 1 effective field goal percentage D, according to KenPom. They were actually even better than us at defending the 2, being number 1 in 2-point field goal percentage D, but they don't force turnovers, ranking 104th, or defensive rebound all that well, which is surprising, where they were number 223rd in KenPom. Keys for us will be hitting our threes and offensive rebounding like heck, and which we always do, and just getting more shots up to win in the end. Based on metrics, this is projected to be a 5-point win for the Cougs at the Toyota Center by KenPom, and I think it's going to be a bigger win, similar to what Bill was saying, especially with Tugler and Arsenault back this season. So I've projected a 78-69 9-point win on the GoCoogs.com boards. Okay, now, so as we go to our Big 12 regular season conference record and standings for this season, we did our own rankings and have combined them for a consensus list. Our top 9 teams are very similar, with only one team with 2 or more spots differential in our rankings, and that was ISU. But a few more differences from spots 10 through 16, where the biggest gaps were with Bill being a bit higher on Arizona State at number 11, where Tom and I had them at number 13 and 15th, respectively, and myself being higher on Utah at number 12, where Tom and Bill had them at 16th and 14th, respectively. And we'll get into those differences more as we go along. So no surprise, all of us had Houston at number 1. In our last episode, we went in depth on our Cougars, so folks can go back and listen to episode 30 to get the details on our Cougars. But at number 2, our consensus was Kansas overall, which was not necessarily a slam dunk. Tom, why don't you go first with your coach's perspective on the Jayhawks?
I actually have Kansas 3, but Kansas is loaded. I remember Bill Self last year. He was frustrated with all the injuries he had. McCullough was out for I don't know how long. Dickinson missed some games. So he went out. He said never again would he be caught in this situation. So he went out and hit the portal pretty good. Kansas does lose. Johnny Furphy went to the NBA, and they also lost Kevin McCullough, NBA player also. But they do have Hunter Dickinson back, their point guard, Dwan Harris, and they have KJ Adams, their small forward, power forward. And then they added some scoring from some other schools. They got AJ Storr from Wisconsin. They got Rylan Griffin, a shooter from Alabama. They got a point guard named Zeke Mayo, who's actually from Lawrence, Kansas, a South Dakota State transfer. Zach Clements, 6'11", big man. He redshirted last year, so he should be expected to see some time. And then they have another 5-star center coming in. He's from the Congo, Flory Baidunga. So they're loaded. They have a player from Houston, Jamari McDowell, Manville High School. He's going to be a sophomore, I believe, also. And they have an NIU transfer, a guy named David Colt. So Kansas, talent-wise, they're loaded. The big thing is how they're going to play on the road. We all know when they play at the Fog, they're front runners. They're really, really good at home. But I have them at third because I don't think they're a tougher team than Iowa State. And I think, where you finish in the conference is how well you're going to be able to play at home. And I just see Iowa State as a tougher team.
All right. How about you, Bill?
Yeah, Tom, you pretty much stole all my thunder.
Sorry, Bill.
I was going to talk about the newcomers that are on their way in, and this is why I have Kansas rated higher. We were talking last week and talking about U of H and how it was like Noah's Ark. There's 2 of everything: 2 point guards, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. Kansas is in exactly the same shape now. They had no depth last year, injuries, just didn't have enough players. And this year they're loaded. I really like Zeke Mayo. I think he's going to be very effective for them. Griffin is a very good player. And then, AJ Storr was Wisconsin's leading scorer, best player, all Big Ten, and he's going to be coming off the bench for Kansas. So they are really deep, and that's why I have them at number 2 in the conference, and why when we get into our national picks, I've got them really high as well.
All right. I cheated and I had KU tied second with ISU with one more conference loss than our Cougars. Just didn't know what the tiebreaker was, so I had them tied for second in the conference. Nationally, I think KU ends up with a higher ranking just based on strength of schedule as well as just reputation. You guys have already covered the new players coming in to supplement the core, and so I'm not going to cover any of that. But from a preseason metrics perspective, they also come in just a hair over Iowa State on KenPom, Hauslam metrics, and Bart Torvik's. The preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 7 in the nation. They're number 7 in offensive efficiency and number 9 in defensive efficiency. So very, very well balanced. They've got an all-time great coach himself, who is the only coach in the conference I would conceivably rate higher than our very own Coach Sampson. So though they have a lot of new pieces, I trust him to be able to mold them into a cohesive unit come March Madness. Now, number 3 on our consensus, and we're going to have to move more quickly throughout the rest of the list because we've got, another 14 to cover, was Iowa State. And where we had the biggest difference with Bill having them 4th, while both Tom and I had them 2nd. So, Bill, why don't you go first with your player's perspective on the Cyclones and why you had them 4th?
Yeah, just to make it clear, I had Baylor, Iowa State, and Arizona, and even a nod to Cincinnati, almost interchangeable.
Yeah.
But I have Iowa State 4th, and the one thing that I'm usually a huge proponent of is experience in the backcourt, and they've got their backcourt back. Lipsy, who may be the best point guard in the conference, and then Keyshawn Gilbert, very good. The only starter they have back in the front court, and nobody from U of H cares to hear this name, and I'm sorry that I have to say it, is Momcilovic,
Yeah.
who hit that dagger to beat us in Ames. But he can pass the ball reasonably well. He's a good shooter, but I didn't especially like what they're bringing back in their front court. I don't think they're incredibly strong. I don't know that they're just that solid up front. They did bring in one player. He's from Charlotte. He does everything. His name is Deshaun Jackson. He's 6'11", 280. He scores. He rebounds. There's nothing he doesn't do. But played lesser competition. We'll see how their front court plays out. But I thought that there were some areas there where they're not as strong this year, and I gave the nod to Baylor at number 3 behind us in Kansas, and I'm sure a lot of people will question that, and I had to question it myself after they got just annihilated at Gonzaga. But I assume we'll get to Baylor.
Yeah, we'll get to that. How about you, Tom?
I picked Iowa State second just because they're a tough team, and I think the toughest teams win. KenPom had them as the number one defensive team. Bill, you alluded to some of the players they bring back to court. Lipsy is kind of ISU's version of Jamal Shedd. He was hurt a little bit toward the end of last year. Interesting thing the other day, they didn't start Momcilovic the other day in their first game. They started Joshua Jefferson, the transfer from St. Mary's, and since the internet's free, I went and I scoured it, and I was trying to see if Momcilovic was injured or anything. It wasn't. It was a coach's decision not to start him, and not sure why, but they started Lipsy, Keyshawn Gilbert, who was the Big 12 tournament MVP. They had Deshaun Jackson at center, and they had Joshua Jefferson at forward. They do lose Robert Jones and Trey King, to their big guys, who were instrumental in their win at Hilton last year. They brought some other portal additions in. They brought a shooter in from UNI, a guy named Nate Heiss. But basically, pretty much about 80% of the same team they had last year. So this conference is going to be a crapshoot with a lot of teams. We don't know how some of these new players are going to come in and gel, and that's what makes it fun. Besides U of H, we have no doubt they're going to win the conference.
Absolutely. I actually think ISU is the second best team in the conference, though I also believe that they end up tied with KU in the standings from a conference record perspective. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 8 in the nation. They're number 30th in offensive efficiency and number 2 in the defensive efficiency. So not quite as well balanced as KU, but still elite. Like us, they win with D, focused on defending every shot and turning people over. And what I love most about them is exactly as you had highlighted, Tom. It's their physicality, just like Houston. Now, number 4 in our consensus was Baylor. So, Tom, why don't you go ahead with your takes on Baylor?
Well, after the Gonzaga game, they didn't look too good. They had a highlight reel dunk, and that was a highlight of their night. I think Gonzaga beat them by about 40. But you know what? March Madness is 4 months away.
Yeah.
And we've seen it before. There's some teams that look really, really good. You turn on Thanksgiving week, you turn on the Maui Invitational, whatever, and there's always a team or two that just wows you. And
like
then
Arizona,
and then something
right?
happens. There's an old coaching maxim that you either get better or you get worse. You never stay the same. Whether that's true or not, it kind of seems that way, where some teams just kind of seem to peak right about at that time. So Baylor's in the opposite boat here. They just got ramrodded. But I think Scott Drew, he's another Hall of Fame coach. He'll right the ship, but they played a lot of hero ball on offense and defense, and they weren't connected on either end of the floor. But they do have Jade Nunn coming back from last year. They picked up a Duke transfer, Jeremy Roach. Langston Love didn't play. He's injured, so he'll give him a boost. Norshad Omier, who played for Miami when they beat us a couple of years ago, he comes in. And then they have a couple of 5-star freshmen, VJ Edgecombe, He struggled against D1 defense. Overall, they got just destroyed. But like I said, March Madness is 4 months away. Scott Drew's not, he just didn't fall off the old turnip truck. He didn't take a dummy pill. There's talent there with Baylor, Hall of Fame coach, so Baylor will get it fixed.
Okay. How about you, Bill? What's your take on Baylor?
I put them at 3, and like I said, 3, 4, 5, and contemplated Cincinnati 6 for any of those spots. Yeah, Baylor got just crushed the other night. They lost the first half by 19 points. They lost the second half by 19 points. 38-point loss. And for a Baylor team, the shooting percentage was absolutely abysmal. I think they shot 3 of 21, if I'm not mistaken, from 3. I mean, just a brutal night. But I was talking to a basketball savant, Jeremy Gonser, who said, think of it like Tiger Woods coming out and double or triple bogeying the first hole and then coming back to, end up shooting 5 under. It's like, look, he got off to a bad start and then he played like he's going to play. And no guarantees that that's going to be the case with Baylor, but they've got a lot of talent. I think Jeremy Roach coming in from Duke, their new point guard, I think he will definitely help them right the ship. Having gone to Miami a couple of times, kind of a fan of Omier, and I think he's going to help them. And the 1 5-star that I had written down was Edgecombe. I think he's going to be a really good player. He chose Baylor over Duke and Kentucky at the end, and Baylor of the top teams is the only one that technically is returning 0 starters. But a lot of them are so interchangeable, non-started games. And in any event, I just think that Scott Drew is going to get all that talent moving in the right direction.
All right. I agree somewhat. Super talented team. I love Baylor and Coach Drew and how they run their program. But I'll be honest, I said this last year as well, I don't trust their defense since Tang left. And the numbers bear that out. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 26 in the nation after the loss to the Zags. They were number 12 in offensive efficiency and number 59 in defensive efficiency. And even worse last year, I think they were in the 70s. Great coach, great talent, but I don't see the grittiness to be top 3 in this conference. Now, number 5, our consensus was newcomer Arizona. Bill, why don't you start off with your take on the Wildcats?
Well, Arizona's only returning 1 starter, although a pretty good 1 starter. But they've brought in a lot of talented newcomers. The 1 starters, Caleb Love, the 6'4" shooting guard who had previously transferred from Carolina, and he's played well at Arizona, and he is going to be in the NBA. But again, the only starter back, KJ Lewis, small forward, is back. One player that they brought in who may end up being better than Love and having a huge impact is a 6'7" power forward named Trey Townsend. He's coming in from Oakland. And for anyone who follows basketball, Oakland's they consistently make the NCAA tournament. They had a deep run a couple of years ago. This guy is really, really good. He led Oakland in virtually everything, and he's going to be a really good player for them. By the way, KJ Lewis, he came on late, played really well for Arizona, small forward. He played in the G League Elite camp over the summer, and so I think he's ready to break out. And they've got another really strong big guy, Toby Awaka, coming in. He's a center. He played at Tennessee and he transferred in. He plays defense, rebounds, which is something that that Arizona doesn't always have at their disposal, or at least their players tend not to want to do so. But I think that 5 is probably a pretty accurate spot for them. They've brought in some really, really good players.
All right. How about you, Tom, from a coach's perspective on Arizona?
I think it's going to be interesting for Arizona. I got them fifth, but I wouldn't be surprised if they finish anywhere from 5 to 9. And the knock on Arizona is the lack of toughness since Tommy Lloyd took over. Half the roster are international players. But Bill was right on this about Trey Townsend, the player from Oakland. He's just tough. He's built like a Sherman tank. He's like 6'6", 6'7", 235. And Oakland, they had that upset. They beat Kentucky last year in the first round. I don't know how Lloyd will use him, but at Oakland, Greg Camp, the coach there, would just put him in the elbow area, and Townsend would catch it at the elbow, and then just muscle his way to the basket or drive. Just a fantastic player. Bill mentioned the Tennessee transfer, Owaka. He should bring some much needed toughness for Arizona.
Yep.
They look impressive in non-conference, and then their lack of toughness, it comes to bite them in the butt, and we'll just have to see.
Yeah, that's been their MO. I love that we've added Arizona to the Big 12, and I love Coach Lloyd, but quite a few new key players, as you guys had mentioned, and they're new to the rigors of the Big 12, and that's why I have them below the top 4. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 9 in the nation after game 1. They're number 10 in offensive efficiency and number 10 in defensive efficiency. So they have been making improvements on that side of the ball each year that Lloyd has been coach. So very balanced, like us in KU. The question is, can they adapt from the soft pack style to the bruising Big 12? Now, number 6 in our consensus was fellow former American Conference Cincinnati. Tom, why don't you go ahead with your coach's perspective on Cincy?
Well, coach-wise, you have Wes Miller. I believe he's entering, third, fourth year at Cincinnati. He's trying to build a program kind of like a Kelvin Sampson program built on toughness. He does have quite a bit of continuity coming back from last year's squad. Jizzle James was a freshman last year, really, really athletic player. I really like Dan Skillings. He's like a 6'7" guard slash wing. You have the Lithuanian. He's 6'8". His name is Simas Lukosius, something like that.
That's
Lithuanian.
Right. That's right.
He plays, guard, wing, 6'8", pretty good shooter. You have the Texas transfer, Dylan Mitchell, wildly athletic, but kind of inconsistent. Needs to work on his shooting. Off the bench, you bring in Day Thomas. He's a solid player. The Iowa transfer, C.J. Frederick, who was injured most of last year, he comes back. Wes Miller did pick up a Bradley transfer who shot 40% from three-point line. Looks like Connor Hickman. He's got a couple of 4-star recruits. I think it'll be tough for them to get playing time. He does have a rim protector, and Aziz Bandago. He's 7 foot. He's in his 5th year. So Cincinnati has the makings of, going to the tournament, NCAA tournament, and possibly jumping Arizona.
All right. That's a hot take. How about you, Bill? What's your player's perspective on Cincy?
I love Cincinnati this year. Cincinnati, who barely made the NIT last year. I have them at 17 overall this year. They went 7-11 in the conference last year, so 4 games under 500. 8 of those 11 losses were by 5 points or less. I mean, they were in a ton of games. They could have had a much better record last year. Played us extraordinarily tough at Cincinnati. I really like this team. I mean, Tom, you mentioned that. I'm not going to get into all the players you mentioned because I know we've got time constraints, but I like Skillings. I like Day Thomas, James. Dylan Mitchell's an interesting addition. Frederick, who started at Iowa and then transferred to Kentucky, he's been injured, I think, every single year that he's played basketball. I think probably since he was about 3 years old. It's unbelievable. He could be the best shooter in the entire country, but he can never get on the court. If he's healthy, he could be a difference maker. I really like Cincinnati this year.
I agree with you guys. Coach Miller has been building back this program brick by brick, finally building up a roster that can compete and play the physical style in the Big 12. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 15th in the nation after game one, number 29 in offensive efficiency, and number 12 in defensive efficiency. So yet another very balanced team in the Big 12. Question is, can they score more efficiently this year? Because they were a bad shooting team and turned the ball over a ton last season. I think they do with more maturity and some more talent this season. Now, number 7 in our consensus Big 12 standings was Texas Tech. Bill, why don't you go ahead with your player's perspective on Tech?
Yeah, Tech has 2 starters back, and they lost their starting backcourt. And quite honestly, they lost a great backcourt. Pop Isaacs and Joe Toussaint, who were 2 really good players. I'm still kind of surprised that Tech somehow let Isaacs go to Creighton to finish up his career. But yeah, nevertheless, Tech could be the best 3-point shooting team in the conference. Chance McMillan, and Darian Williams are both great shooters. The thing about Tech is that they shoot from the perimeter and they play extraordinary defense. So it kind of plays into what you guys were talking about with Iowa State. Grant McCaslin coaches defense and prioritizes it. And to replace probably Toussaint, who is more of the point guard, even though Isaacs handled the ball a ton, they brought in a kid named Elijah Hawkins, who's just an assist machine. He's coming in from Minnesota. The only other player I'll mention is a 6'9" power forward from New Mexico named JT Top, and he also tested the NBA waters and decided to come back and then transfer to Tech. Awfully tough to lose your starting backcourt, but they've got a good team. They're very well coached, and so I think 7 is pretty appropriate.
How about you, Tom, from a coach's view on Tech?
I see Texas Tech as a NCAA tournament team again. Grant McCaslin, excellent coach. When he was at North Texas, they were one of the best defensive teams in the league, and they played at a slow pace. Last year, I thought Tech played a little bit faster than I was expecting sludge. You're playing in concrete Nikes, but they played played faster than I thought they were, and maybe that was because he doesn't have his roster yet. So maybe this year we'll see more of the North Texas style when McCaslin was there. But the key addition, I think, was like Bill alluded to, is the point guard, Elijah Hawkins. He's unselfish point guard. I'm not saying that Pop Isaacs was selfish, but he was pretty much shoot first, ask questions later type point guard. So, that might make a difference this year with them. But I see Tech as a tough out who's ever playing them. And, I see him as a NCAA tournament team again.
Yeah, as well. I've got a lot of faith in Coach McCaslin, but I was surprised at how they won last year. It was more dependent on offense, like you mentioned, Tom, than D, like how they won at North Texas. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 11th in the nation after game one, number 17th in offensive efficiency, and a surprising number 8 in defensive efficiency. So there's a bit of confidence he reverts back to his defensive ways this season from the analytics guys. Since Tech, quite honestly, they weren't that great on D. They were like number 65 in defensive efficiency last season. They've recruited well, and I trust McCaslin. That's why I've got them so high. Now, number 8 in the conference, our consensus was BYU was going to be in that slot. Tom, why don't you go ahead with your coach's perspective on BYU?
Speaking of coaches, they have a brand new coach in Kevin Young. Kevin Young has experience in a whole bunch of different professional leagues. And most recently, he comes as an assistant coach for the Phoenix Suns. He really doesn't have any experience. You have to go back to, I think, the 2007 season was the last time he was doing some college coaching, and he wasn't a head coach. But he's brought in some players, some highly touted players. He has 2 of them. Both these players are projected first-round pick. One of them's projected to be in the top 10. So you're looking at a 6'8", I think his name is pronounced Kanan Catchings, and then you have 6'9" guard and Igor Demon, I believe it is. BYU last year, their weakness was inside. Like Al McGuire used to say, they were a donut team. They had nothing in the middle. They brought Trey Ore. That's his last name. They brought him off the bench last year, and he gave him some inside presence, and he returns. Richie Saunders, Dallin Hall. They did get a transfer, a big man from Utah, Kieta. So I think last year, BYU, they lived by the three and they died by the three. And sometimes that's a tough way to play. When they're going down, great, but when you're missing them, not so great. So I do think they do have a little bit more of an inside presence this year. They should be a fun, exciting team to watch.
Bill, what's your player's view on BYU?
Well, it's hard to say what to make of them right now because Kevin Young's coming in. Mark Pope went to Kentucky, the head coach. Young coached the Phoenix Suns, and he said this is his absolute dream job, dream scenario. He and his wife are members of Church of Latter-day Saints, and so he's Mormon and coming to BYU, and this is where he wants to be. I think from this point forward, just to save us time, I'm not going to mention more than two or at most three players from any team, but the two, and Tom, they were the first two you mentioned. Catchings, who comes from if any of you remember basketball from the 70s and definitely into the 80s, Harvey Catchings was a center in the NBA, played for the Bucks among other teams. I mean, he was a top 30 recruit. And then Igor Demon, a 6'9" shooting guard. And everyone's talking about him being a lottery pick. So they brought in some players. Dallin Hall, I like their point guard. He's definitely a pass-first player. And so I think they stay in the top half of the conference because got him running the show, and they've got some talent. They've still got some good three-point shooters that are back. But it's just hard to say how they're going to play, what they're going to do. I imagine they'll still shoot a lot of threes, but with a brand new coach who doesn't have any NCAA coaching experience, there's not a lot to draw on. So we'll have to see how things play out.
Yeah, completely agree. New highly touted NBA assistant and Coach Young was armed with some serious NIL dollars to assemble the team he's got coming in this season. I think I'm buying into the hype some to even have them here at number 8. So we'll see. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 19th in the nation after game 1, number 22 in offensive efficiency, and number 27 in defensive efficiency. So a broken record, another very balanced team in the Big 12. I don't have much else to go on other than they have the most unknowns, quite honestly. And to me, they're the most fascinating team to follow this year. And so I'll definitely be following very closely. Now, number 9, our consensus was Kansas State. Tom, why don't you go ahead?
Just like a couple of years ago, Jerome Tang has basically a new team again, a lot of roster turnover. Did bring in some talent. You got Illinois transfer Coleman Hawkins, 12 points, 6 rebounds, $2 million man. That's the word on the street, is what it took for K-State to bring him in. So, man, that's that's a lot of money for a guy that had averaged 12 and 6. They did bring in Achor from Sanford, really good player. Brendan Housen from Villanova. They did bring in Michigan's leading scorer, Doug McDaniel, at point guard, but he didn't start the other night. He came off the bench. So, and then a whole host of other players too many to talk about. So, once again, K-State is pretty much a mystery team. Don't know how all these disparate parts are going to fit together and gel. A couple of years ago they fit perfectly, gelled, and they made a run at the Final Four.
How about you, Bill?
Well, I don't have them at 9. I've got them one spot lower. Only one starter returning. Yeah, I mean, they lost their entire backcourt. They lost Kaluma, the small forward. I think it's going to be a tough year for Kansas State. They brought in a lot of players. Tom, you mentioned them all. McDaniel, Housen, Hawkins. They brought in a 7-footer from Kentucky, but I think it's going to be a tough year for them. Probably not even as good as they were last year.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I don't like all the player turnover at K-State, but I do really like Coach Tang. Love his philosophy in helping young men grow and love his take on accountability. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is only 51st, even after big game one win. They're number 75 in offensive efficiency and number 20 in defensive efficiency. Problem with them was offense last year. So the question is, can they get it to a point of good this season? If they can correct the turnover problems from last season, I think they may be one of the last teams in the conference that go dancing. Now, number 10, our consensus was UCF. Bill, why don't you go ahead with your players' perspective? Because I think you have them, you're pretty high on them.
I had them one spot higher. I have them at 9. And for anyone that started out watching this season, they beat A&M on Monday night. But that's not entirely surprising. They beat Kansas at home last year. They beat Texas. They beat some highly ranked teams, or at least ranked teams. Kansas certainly was highly ranked. I think they were number 3 at the time. But they play well at home. They've got a very good backcourt, a very, very good backcourt coming back. Darius Johnson, 6'1" point guard, but he's a shooter. 6'4" Jalen Sellers, or 2 guard. He's a shooter. Those two are going to be their keys. They brought in a couple of really strong additions. Keyshawn Hall, a 6'7" swingman from George Mason, who could do an awful lot, and Benny Williams, 6'10" power forward from Syracuse, who is a defensive player. He rebounds, so that's going to fit in well for Johnny Dawkins. And just one more, they've got a 7'2" center. He was a 5-star recruit. He's still a little thin, and he probably needs to put on some weight to be effective, but his name's Mustafa Thiam. But he was a 5-star recruit, so we'll see how that plays out. I think UCF is going to be better than most think this year. They still may not be good enough to make the tournament, but I think they're going to be right on the bubble at the end.
Yeah, maybe. Tom, what's your coach's view on UCF?
Yeah, the big win over A&M the other day, and they did that without Jalen Sellers. He was he's still sitting with an injury. They got off to a horrific start. Couldn't hit a bull in the butt from 5 feet, but settled down, started making some shots. Typical Johnny Dawkins team is, they're a good rebounding team. They play good defense. I'm not going to go through all the players, but, they're going to be guard oriented. If you look at any kind of weakness, it's probably going to be in the front court, but they probably won't look to the front court guys for much scoring. So just look for them for defense and rebounding.
All right. I'm not a fan of Coach Dawkins. I just feel like they continue to tread water season over season. However, I will admit that he's assembled a very talented but enigmatic team this season. So for me, they're the second most interesting team to follow in the Big 12 because I think their upside is very high, but disaster could really render them bottom feeders if the talent doesn't mesh. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 60 after their big win over Texas A&M, number 85 in offensive efficiency, and number 34 in defensive efficiency. They just have to shoot better and turn the ball over a lot less this season. They have the talent. Let's just see if Dawkins can mold this team of athletes. Now, number 11 in our consensus Big 12 rankings was TCU. Tom, why don't you give us your take?
Led by Jamie Dixon, you can almost call Jamie Dixon Jerome Tang light because they both have the same colors. I get both teams mixed up in my head, but they both have roster turnover, and that's no different this year. So they did get a former Kansas recruit, big man Ernest Uday. They got another transfer from Green Bay, another one from, I could just go on and on and on. They're transfer from here, transfer from there. So once again, there's a little bit of talent there. Just see how well it meshes.
Yeah. How about you, Bill, from a player's perspective with TCU?
Yeah. One starter back. However, they lost their top 7 scorers. They lost 9 players. the team is now comprised of 1 starter, 6 freshmen, and 5 transfers. I like Jamie Dixon. This is not going to be a good year.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
That's that.
I agree. I was a big fan of Coach Dixon from his days at Pitt. And I like his ability to adapt to a much quicker pace at TCU when his old style just wasn't working. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 55 in the nation after game 1, number 47 in offensive efficiency, and number 65 in defensive efficiency. So balanced as well, but not great, right, on either side. The question is, can they stop turning the ball over as well, like last season? With so many new players that I actually don't even think are of Big 12 caliber, I don't think it happens for them. Now, at number 12, our consensus was West Virginia. Bill, why don't you go ahead with your player's perspective?
First of all, Steve, when you talk about intriguing teams that you want to follow, I'm going to put, and this may be a surprise, but I'm going to put the University of Houston Cougars at number 1. With that said, I think this team could be interesting. They've got a brand new coach, Darren DeVries, from Drake. Drake is a great Missouri Valley team. They play well every year. They make the tournament. However, West Virginia has 0 starters back off a semi-talented but really disappointing team. I'll just conclude this by mentioning one player that will absolutely have the biggest impact, I think, and that is DeVries' son, Tucker, 6'7" swingman, guard forward, who was the best player at aforementioned Drake. And that DeVries has obviously brought in a ton of players. He's a really good coach, but yeah, I've got West Virginia at 13, but I do think they'll be intriguing to watch.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they're also another team I'm going to follow closely as well. Tom, what's your coach's view on West Virginia?
It's going to be tough sledding for Coach DeVries. And I think Tucker is going to, I wouldn't say struggle, but the Big 12 is a different animal than the Missouri Valley Conference. It's even tougher when you're coming in as a new coach and you got to build a roster, and they got a great fan base, so they'll probably play a lot better at home than they will away, but I don't see them doing a whole lot this year. It's going to be tough.
Yeah. I loved Drake, loved Coach DeVries when he was there. Bringing his son gives this team at least a chance when paired with Javon Small, who they got from Okie State. Their preseason adjusted efficiency margin is number 73 in the nation after game 1, number 74 in offensive efficiency, and number 78 in defensive efficiency. The concern, as you guys had both highlighted, is do they have enough talent to win in year 1? One player to watch, in addition to whom you guys have mentioned, is a kid by the name of Amani Hansberry, transfer from Illinois. Didn't play a lot as a freshman, but showed flashes. So this is another one of those teams that I've got some interest in following to see how they develop over the course of the year. Then we get to our bottom 4, and we had ASU, then Utah, then Colorado, then Okie State bringing up the rear. Big difference was I was highest on Utah at 12, and Bill was highest on Arizona State at 11. So let's just take these 4 as a group and quickly give some highlights. Bill, you've got any key points that you wanted to highlight with the 4 bottom feeders?
Well, I'll mention ASU because I do have them finishing ahead of both TCU and West Virginia. They lost a ton of players as well. They were a small team last year. They're actually a really big team. They're huge this year. I'm only going to mention 2 players that they've got coming in, both 5-star recruits. One is a 6'9" power forward named Jaden Quaintance. The other is their new point guard. He's 6'5", Jason Sannon. Both of these guys were heavily recruited, and so they're going to be young, but there are a bunch of good players that Hurley brought in addition to these 2, and so I think of the teams that are feeding at the bottom of the Big 12, ASU will be the best of the 4.
All right. How about you, Tom, for those last 4?
Last 4, I have Utah at the bottom. 10 new players, 3 new assistants, a new GM. They do have Gabe Madsen. They brought in his brother as a transfer, but just not enough talent. in relation to the other squads. Bill talked about Arizona State, two big time recruits, but they got hammered in an exhibition by Duke. I think it was like 103-47.
Yep.
They barely beat Idaho State the other day, 55-48. So Oklahoma State, Colorado, 10 newcomers again, lose 3 players to the NBA draft. Oklahoma State with the new coach, Steve Lutz, who had some good teams at Charlotte, Western Kentucky. But like I said, with Darian DeVries, it's a tough conference to come in and then try to build a roster. There's no forgiveness. There's no mercy. This conference.
Yeah.
Nobody don't feel sorry for you.
That's right. It's the no conference for old men, man. So none of the 4 have what it takes to challenge for the top. Utah, Colorado, OSU just don't have the horses to compete. And for me, I had ASU 15th because I have zero confidence in Bobby Hurley as a coach. I had Utah higher than you guys because I like Coach Smith and I like his style with so much size again. And I think that's just going to end up being a weird matchup for all the teams because they just play differently than the rest of the team. So that's really the only reason I have them a little bit higher. So now let's get to our new national top 8+1 national championship contenders for the 24-25 season. Consensus top 8+1. We had number 1, no surprise, Houston. Number 2, Alabama. Number 3, Kansas. Number 4, UConn. Number 5, the Zags. Number 6, Iowa State. Number 7, Duke. Number 8, Baylor. And then number 9, North Carolina. We don't have much time, so the differences in our consensus rankings are that all of Tom's teams made it in. Bill, you were higher on Auburn and soft on North Carolina, and I was higher on Arizona and soft on Baylor. So, Bill, why don't you give your 2-point reason for why North Carolina was not making your list?
North Carolina, and like I said, I did a top 25. I had Carolina down at 14. North Carolina, I think, despite the fact that they've got as much talent on their roster as maybe anyone from 5 through 15, I think they are far, far, far and away the worst shooting team of the top teams. I think they're just a horrendous shooting team. I can't believe that they didn't bring in any shooters. And I just don't like Carolina this year.
Yeah, understood. And for me, on the Baylor front, even though we've got them pretty highly ranked, as I stated earlier, I don't think Baylor's defense is national championship caliber, but we shall see. So, wow, that is it for our jam-packed 31st and Big 12/national top 8+1 episode of the No Conference for Old Men podcast. Hope you all enjoyed it. And again, would really appreciate it if folks would follow, subscribe, or collect our podcast, depending on your podcast platform of choice. We are also available via the Republic of Football podcast feed from the folks at Dave Campbell's Texas Football as the only basketball-centric podcast, or at the GoCoogs.com website for those that prefer to digest the content that way. We appreciate the continued support from all. Also, please give us a follow on our Twitter account, No Conference for Old Men. Thank you all again for listening, and be on the lookout next week to download and listen as our next episode drops. Take care, everyone.